Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 Reasons Podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick here, as always, with Chris Whittingham. Now that you found us, make sure that you hit the follow or subscribe button, depending on the platform that you are getting us. That will allow you to get all of the old episodes as well as all of the new episodes as soon as they post, as long as you hit notifications on. Also, check out the other podcasts in our network. You know a lot of the names by now. I'll just give you a couple. Fish Tank is having Zach Thomas on this week. Goldie on Ice is having Ed Jovanovski. Also, check out Miami Heat Beat as they continue to sort of follow what the Heat didn't do this offseason. And 3 Yards Per Carry will be live from Dolphins training camp this week. What we're doing today is we're introducing you to somebody else who is part of our network. We decided that we didn't want to just do the sports that are on the field, the wins and losses that way, but obviously we recognize the power of fantasy sports. So we reached out, we asked a bunch of people, we said, who are the people to go to on fantasy sports? And 2 of the guys that came up, and they're doing a podcast called Fantasy on 5 on our network, are David Gonos as well as Gary and Thorne. We're happy to have David with us today, and we hope that after you listen to all the information that he provides to you, that you will subscribe to his podcast as well, Fantasy on 5, which you can find on iTunes, also on Google Play, Podbean, and a lot of the places that you can find ours. Also, they've been providing content for our patron feed, breakdowns of particular players. If you go to Podbean, you check out the 5 Reasons feed and just click on Be a Patron and sign up. You will get all of that content as well. David, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you doing this.
Oh, no problem. This is awesome. We're entering August. This is like the time for fantasy football. Sure, when September rolls around, setting lineup, but this is the time for fantasy football, and there's hardly any other sports going on. Now we're excited. This is it.
Yep, absolutely. And what we want to do with you today, we're going to keep it a little bit more general than you do on your podcast with Gary. And I know Gary's going to appear on 3 Yards Per Carry here soon and get more specific on players. But we want to go with some big themes here today. And kind of the premise of this pod is how to run and or win your league. So a lot of you out there are commissioners of your leagues, which I know can be a total pain in the ass. I think I'm still trying to collect money for my fantasy basketball league, which had like half of Miami sports media in it. And there's still people who are now big timers on ESPN who owe us $180, but we won't get any more specific on that. And so what we want to do is talk not only to the players in fantasy sports, the people who obviously set their lineups every week, but also the people who are running their leagues in terms of what is the best type of league to run. And so I'm going to start here with part 1, David. I know that there are, and we're not really going to deal with daily fantasy here as much. We're going to deal with sort of the league related stuff. So for you, what is the best type of league to play in? How many people should be involved in the league? How many players should you be drafting? Should you be doing PPR or not? How much do you count defense? I want to get into all of those things with you here in part 1. So if David Gonos was going to design his perfect fantasy football league, what would it be?
I'm an old school guy, so I like standard leagues, not PPR, but I do like, PPR was invented to kind of like give the wide receivers a boost because running backs were a little too important. So they gave points per reception to give those wide receivers a boost. Well, that also ended up giving halfbacks that caught passes out of the backfield a boost. So then they came up with the 3 wide receivers in the lineup, which that I like more. So I like a standard league, 3 wide receivers. I even like a flex player thrown in. So it's a running back, a wide receiver, or a flex position in there. And, it's interesting about the PPR leagues. Just 5 years ago on CBSSports.com, only 28% of their leagues were PPR setups. Now it's 58%. It's almost flip-flopped, like 1/3 to 2/3. So 58% are PPR leagues. But what I'd like to tell your listeners is try the half PPR, which is half point per reception. And then you're looking at a nice mix of it favors some running backs and it favors wide receivers, but it helps everybody.
That feels like exactly the right balance between having PPR where, maybe it gives too much to receivers or receiving running backs versus heavily favoring the running back in standard leagues. So I'm a big fan of half-point PPR as well. What for you is sort of the biggest challenge, right? So we talk about dynasty leagues where you're basically only drafting young players, 2 quarterback leagues, IDP leagues, which is individual defensive players, I believe. So you can draft like individual defensive players. players. My personal favorite, I love an auction league. I have not done enough, and frankly, it's because I can't get my friends to buy into it. They like sort of your average snake draft, but I'm a big fan of an auction league. Of the kind of non-traditional formats, which of those appeals to you the most? Obviously, considering the fact that you're an old school guy.
You're right. I am an old school guy, but auction leagues are by far the most fun to play. And it's really all about the draft, and that's half the fun of a fantasy football league is that draft day. And if you're not doing a live draft, together in a bar or at a sports bar or somebody's house or something, it's a big discount on the fun, right? It takes out a little bit. In an auction league, you pretty much have to be there. They do have some sites that you can do auctions on there, but the auction league brings in this poker player perspective. Like now you've got mind games going on. You're quick bidding and then you're slow bidding and you're eyeballing a guy that's raising you on a player you're bidding on. Like there's a whole nother strategy there involved. And it's a lot more fun because you can get the player you want. Whatever player you want, you pay the price, you can have them. If you're in a regular draft and you have the 11th pick, you're not getting Todd Gurley and you're not getting Le'Veon Bell and you're not getting, so if you want those guys in an auction league, they're yours. You just have to pay the price. And then you got to backfill with some, $1 guys later on. But that's the most fun to me. And you mentioned Keeper and Dynasty League. I love those. I was in and this is back in 2002, I was in an auction dynasty IDP league.
Oh my God.
Ran for like 8 or 9 years. And it was so awesome. And it was just ridiculous to deal with though. Like, we had to keep the commissioner down in the basement, just working nonstop. It was such a intense league, but it was a lot of fun, but it was just so tough. I mean, we had a salary cap, like our salary cap was the NFL salary cap. So every time the salary cap went up in the NFL, ours went up.
Holy
we
crap.
had to sign contracts and a rookie draft and a free agent.
Oh my God.
It was crazy. It was awesome.
That's kind of what I did to the basketball league, actually. I mean, not quite that far, but I ran this thing for about 12 years. And a lot of people who listen to us know were in it. Sedano and Israel Gutierrez
nice.
And Jamie Eisenberg, which we'll get
Nice.
into that a little bit here, in terms of Jamie's impact on that league, because I always seem to be in his division and we were always fighting for first at the end, and Brian London, who was always last. And so except for 1 year, I designed all of these crazy formulas. It was kind of PER before PER. And I guess the question is, with football, I felt like with basketball, it was kind of necessary to make it fun. With football, though, I don't think people want it too complicated, right, David?
Exactly.
Like they don't want it simple. They want to watch the game Sunday and they want to know, my guy scored or he didn't score. He got this many yards. It's going to be worth this much. I feel like overcomplicating football leagues takes a lot of the fun out of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we mentioned half PPR earlier, and outside of the fact that you have to say half PP a lot, which is troublesome. Just even thinking of, hey, I just got half a point, like just that concept is anytime there's decimals involved.
Right. Well, for me, decimal scoring is like the correct way to go about the yardage, because for me, the difference between 31 yards and 49 yards is substantive, and that 1.8 points makes all the difference. And so
our listeners will not be surprised by that. I'm going to tell you, if Al from Heat Beat is listening to this podcast, he absolutely would predict that you love the decimal point.
Love decimal scoring.
Love
decimal scoring.
Sports.
But there's a happy medium, because back in the early 90s, it was fantasy football was touchdowns only. You didn't get points if someone got, Barry Sanders would rattle off 170 yards in a game and not score, and you'd get 0. So that was basic scoring. So there was no complications of how many points did Barry get me. The only problem was you had to watch the highlights, and sometimes they wouldn't show a score. So for like 24 hours, you were freaking out about what that third touchdown was from the Steelers.
Or waiting for all the box scores to come in the next morning.
Exactly. Right. But you know what? One thing I wanted to say, Ethan, about your commissioner trying to get the money, here's a tip for you. Do the first 3 people that pay get a 20% discount, or I'm sorry, 10% discount. And then the last person that pays an extra 30%.
Wow.
But what if they never pay? I mean,
broken knees.
I mean, again, there's prominent sideline reporters from ESPN who still have not paid from 3 years ago. So I'm just wondering what if they never pay? Because that is, I mean, I know we want to get to players here, but I mean, that is the biggest irritation for a commissioner is the idea of guys not paying and getting them to pay. And now
in the Venmo and the Cash App era, like I don't feel like that can happen.
Well, it does happen though. I mean, it absolutely does. I mean, you're right. It should be easier, but a lot of times it's not.
Because like on the Cash App, you can just send you can request money from someone. Like you can't avoid that, right? It's not like having to write a check and go to a bank and send it via the mail. Like you can just do it on your phone. Like it shouldn't be that difficult to get money for as a fantasy football commissioner now.
Well, let me ask you this question, David, before we get to the number of players, because this plays into the whole money thing too, is what do you do about the guys who lose interest after they're 2-4 and stop setting their lineups? Because I found that to be extraordinarily irritating. Like
ban them.
Be
gone.
I tried that when I ran a football league, but again, it's very, very frustrating because you get to a certain point in the league and guys are not setting lineups, and we know that affects the entire league when you don't do that, and then you become a nag. Why haven't you set your lineup? But how do you force people? Because we tried you pay extra money if you're last, like that. We did that with some, and we never collected the money. So again, this all kind of ties together. Like, what is your solution for that?
For the most part, you just kind of evolve your league toward the point where you don't have guys in it that do that anymore. So if guys are doing that, you mark them, and then the next year you got to get somebody else. And if granted, that means you've got to do some legwork and find somebody else that wants to play and all this stuff. Here's the thing right now is, did you play fantasy football with your dad?
No, I played fantasy football with friends. I mean, we had a league. I mean, I had a couple of leagues. We started with one league that was called 20-somethings plus one when we started. And then it was like 40-somethings plus one about 15 years later. And again, it's people who are in our network were in it. I mean, Josh Darrow was in it for a long time. I mean, it was core.
I've played with my dad though before, to answer your question though, David.
Well, now did he play with his dad?
No,
right?
No.
So, but if you have a son, or a daughter, would you play fantasy football eventually with them?
Sure, yeah.
Of course, right? So right now we're seeing generations, kind of like exponentially growing where there's going to be fantasy leagues everywhere. You're going to have a fantasy league with this group of people and a fantasy league with this group of people, a water cooler league with friends at work and ones with your family. Like, we're going to have so many different leagues going that you were talking about different leagues earlier. You really should kind of spread out the different types of league. Get one that is an auction, because you're changing up your interests. You know what I'm saying? And you're talking about IDP earlier. Do an IDP league, even if it's just drafting or starting one defensive lineman, one linebacker, and one D-back. That's barely an IDP league, but it's enough for you to get interest in who just got the strip sack for, and run back for a touchdown. Like, that's a big deal. So to me, I want to try and get people to start diversifying the type of leagues that they're playing in.
I agree. Here. The only thing I will never do is an IDP league. I find that to be a step too far for like, if I'm having to watch D-line play, I don't know if I can do that.
Omar would be very upset.
It's just a step too far for me.
Yeah,
and it's weird too, because IDP kind of goes against the grain of larger IDP leagues, goes against the grain of regular fantasy football, because you almost want to pick some players that are bad. Like, for instance, a rookie cornerback is going to get picked on, which means he's going to rack up 10 tackles a game, which is good for your team, but horrible. Those tackles are because he can't stop the guy that's catching them on him,
Yeah. I was actually on the radio with Channing Crowder today, and he told me that he had 120 tackles his first year because he was on the same defense as Jason Taylor, Junior Seau, and Zach Thomas. Oh, wow. And he said literally his linebacker coach went to him and said, when opposing offensive coordinators are going to look at our defense, who do you think they're going to pick on? They're going to pick on your ass. So you better be ready to make tackles, and that's why he had 120 in his first year.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I don't know about the individual defensive players. Not sure if I want to go there. One more thing before we move on to the next part here. So again, designing the perfect league. Get away from the categories for a second, but the number of players that should be drafted. So basic, so that there's, because this is another issue. Like, you want there to be enough in free agency that there's activity, right? And sure. I feel like sometimes I've been in some leagues that are like 15 guys, in the league drafting 15 guys. And so you've got, 225 players that are being picked. What is the right number for you? Number of teams in the league and number of players that they're picking?
For me, I like a 12-team league, and that's becoming not the norm anymore. Now with ESPN, like a lot of these websites do, their default league is 10 teams, which really affects a lot, especially like, we talk about ADP, which is average draft position. Like, it affects average draft position. But I like a 12-team league with 10 starters. So it's a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, a flex, a tight end, kicker, and defense. And then 6 bench players.
Before we get back to today's podcast, I want to introduce you to another great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is the Ashley Home Store in Davie. You can find them right off of I-75 and Sheridan in the same shopping center as the big, beautiful movie theater there. And I can speak to this personally because I just shopped there, had a great experience. They have terrific staff, great values with up to 72 months, no interest. Just stop in the store there. It's a huge showroom. They've got lots of stuff for everybody. And check in with the general manager there, Jamie, and tell him that 5 Reasons sent you. So again, the Ashley Home Store in Davie. Got to check them out. Let's move on to part 2 here. And I have some very definite thoughts about this one. And we brought up our friend Jamie Eisenberg on this. And I dealt with this with him in a league for a long time because obviously he was very competitive in the league.
What?
Yeah, but believe it or not, did not win all the time, though. Did not win all the time, Chris. Just want to make that point.
One of my points of pride is when we were doing radio and you invited me into your fantasy league, and the first time I played Jamie, I beat him. So that was right. That was like a real point of pride for me.
Right, but he has very specific drafting rules, and I feel like these are sort of a lot of the sort of the expert fantasy players go by these, and dealt with this with him every time. He would never pick a quarterback in the first 5 or 6 rounds ever, just consistently. And for some reason, I was always drafting right after him, like in a snake draft, and then I guess right before him on the other way. And so he kept taking the player that I wanted. Like this happened over and over. But his whole philosophy, and I know that this is, again, common, is you get your running backs early. And he would do this, and he would take 2 or 3 in the first 5 rounds. And I've always kind of had an issue with that. And here's my reason for it, David, and tell me if I'm wrong on this. If you look at the top running backs from year to year, they always change, whereas the top quarterbacks are more consistent. But I'm looking at, we could do this with any 2 years, but if you go back to 2016 and the rushing leaders there, here were the rushing leaders that year. This is just by yardage, not by touchdowns, but just by yardage. Elliott, Jordan Howard, which I bet a lot of people wouldn't know that, DeMarco Murray, Jay Ajayi, Le'Veon Bell, LaShawn McCoy, David Johnson, LeGarrette Blount, Devonta Freeman, and Lamar Miller. Okay, and then you go to the next year. Number 1 is Kareem Hunt, a rookie. Todd Gurley, who had a bad year the year before, was 2. Le'Veon Bell was there, but his numbers were not as big as they were good, but they weren't as big as the year before. McCoy was there again. Mark Ingram snuck in there. Jordan Howard again. Melvin Gordon, who went 2 years without a touchdown, was 7th, okay, and had 8 touchdowns. Fournette, another rookie. C.J. Anderson, who I feel has been sort of perpetually underrated. And then Elliott, and again, that was because of the suspension. But again, a lot of variance. And I think if you go back to other years, you'll find even more variance than that. There was actually a little bit more consistency over those 2 years. So I guess my question is I know how valuable running backs are, but this idea of I have to get this back or this back or this back, when I was doing it, I won the league a lot by not following that philosophy, by choosing other backs or by getting a premium wide receiver, maybe if that was a down position. Or for years, I had Peyton Manning in a keeper league for 10 years. I had a guy who was going to play every game, and he was going to be really good, and I didn't have to worry about the position. So what is your philosophy as far as taking positions?
Well, everything you said made sense. The only problem is with running back, a team's going to rush the ball, let's say 50% of the time. There's only going to be one guy that's going to get the ball to run. Now, there could be a split backfield, like there could be a 60-40 or whatever split. But you look at receivers, there's 3 receivers that could catch the ball at any time, and then a tight end, and then possibly a running back. But anytime they rush the ball, it's going to be the running back. Okay, so we know it's a premium position from a volume perspective. A. B, there's only 32 starting tailbacks in the NFL, but you're starting 24 in a fantasy football league. And as looking at quarterbacks, there's 32 starting quarterbacks, but there's only 12 starting in fantasy. So the point being is there's so much more depth at the other positions that you can wait. And I understand what you're saying. And absolutely, when you get a Peyton Manning, that's a difference maker. But you better be right on those picks behind him. And that's part of what happens. And there's actually you're talking about sometimes you'll do premium wide receivers early. There's a strategy called the 0 running back theory. Basically, you don't draft a running back for the first 4, 5, 6 rounds, and then you just go nuts on running backs in those middle rounds. That's fine, but you better be right on those middle picks, and you better not have those wide receivers disappoint, because now you're running from behind. Now you're behind on everyone. And you better not have someone else in the league doing that same strategy, because now you're fighting for the same running backs in the middle of the draft. So that's a little difficult. That can be difficult at times. But back to your point about quarterbacks, the 12th quarterback compared to the 7th quarterback isn't as much of a difference as the 20th running back to the 12th running back. So you can wait, and you're not giving up that much. Whereas if you get the higher running backs, that's a much bigger difference than the 24th running back.
For me, I would kind of call it the drop-off theory, which and that's sort of how I go by it. I used to put a premium every year on trying to get Rob Gronkowski, because the drop-off between Gronkowski as the best fantasy tight end, who is effectively a receiver, and the 10th best fantasy tight end was substantive, that you could never figure out who the 10th best fantasy tight end was going to be. And then, so I would try and get Gronkowski, and then if I did, I'd feel great about basically winning that position every week. And then if I didn't, then I would wait for the 3rd to last round, in which I got who I thought was going to be the 10th best tight end, because I didn't think the difference between 2 and 10 was that big. So I do think that there are certain players that kind of transcend some of these rules, so you kind of have to play year by year. I don't value Gronkowski in that same level anymore, just because of his injuries, and now there's obviously all the retirement talk. But I actually subscribe to the wait on the quarterback theory because of what Gonos said, which is that the difference between 7 and 12 isn't going to be that big, and you're getting a top-line starting quarterback. The 11th rated quarterback, I just pulled up ESPN's here real quick. It's sort of the consensus average. 11 is Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, if Jimmy Garoppolo had as good a season as Tom Brady, would you be that surprised? So, and that's just sort of my strategy, that I'd rather have Jimmy Garoppolo and stack up on receivers and running backs and hope that those guys hit, when I feel like I have a decent chance if I get Jimmy Garoppolo in round 9 that I'm going to do well at quarterback. Whereas if I got, the backup running back for the Vikings in round 10, I'm not going to feel as good that player is going to be a week-to-week starter. So I do subscribe to the wait to draft a quarterback theory.
The thing to remember, too, is what you're just saying. Say Jimmy Garoppolo, say he stinks the first 2 weeks. You're already, because you drafted late on a quarterback, you're already watching the waiver wire for anybody that has a hot start.
Right.
You're the guy that owns Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees. And
they're not looking to replace them.
They're not even looking at that guy. They could care less who starts off hot. So you could jump on Pat Mahomes, he'd probably get drafted. Say Derek Carr throws 5 touchdowns in the first 2 weeks. You're going to be the guy that's going to be able to grab him for cheap. And meanwhile, that pick you didn't waste on him early in the draft, you used on a second wide receiver or a third running back or whatever. And going back to the tight end thing is, you mentioned Gronk, he's kind of fallen back, but 2 tight ends have kind of caught him too, Zach Ertz and Travis Kelce. So that gap has thinned a lot. And also what you're saying about the tight end part, by taking Gronk early, you're now chasing, like we talked about before, you're chasing the other positions a little bit. So you have to be right on those other spots.
Now, before we get back to today's podcast, I want to introduce you to another of the great sponsors on the 5 Reasons Sports Network, and that is Texas Roadhouse. We've been running a lot of contests for Texas Roadhouse recently, but you'll feel like a winner even if you don't win one of those. You get great food at a reasonable price, and they have great specials, and that includes kids night every Tuesday night. My daughter wants to go to Texas Roadhouse. It's not just because I get to pay only $1.99 for a kid's meal with a purchase of an adult meal, but she also gets to hang out with Andy the Armadillo. She gets to do arts and crafts. There's someone making balloons there. They just got a lot of really cool events. So check out Texas Roadhouse. It's right off of I-75 on Miramar Parkway between Broward and Dade counties. It is accessible to everything. Again, great food, reasonable price, and we'll even be having an event there in August for Dolphins preseason. So definitely check them out. All right, so let's get to part 3, and let's get to some specifics here with David, and give us some names of some guys who, in your opinion, are really like boom or bust, because I feel like this comes up in every draft. There's a couple of guys that everybody seems to want, and a lot of times those guys don't end up panning out. One guy that actually, and we're going to talk about the Dolphins a little later, but I felt like in the last couple drafts I've been in that there was this rush to get in on Devontae Parker, like just in case, right? Just in case that he actually fulfilled some of that talent, and obviously that has not worked out all that well. But I just want to look at it league-wide here. Like, who do you think are going to be some hot names this year that could be great or could really, really fall apart?
First off, that'd be a great name for a sleeper wide receiver. Justin Case, straight out of Wichita State. Anyways, that's Atlanta. Okay, so my sleeper. So when we say sleeper and breakout, when I say sleeper, I'm talking about Allen Hurns right now for the Cowboys. They've lost a cajillion targets in Dez Bryant and Jason Witten. Leaving that, Jason Witten retired and Dez Bryant getting cut. So where are those targets going to go? Dak Prescott's got to throw someplace. And I love Hurns coming over from Jacksonville. It's already shown.
Wait a second, guys. I screwed it. Chris, were you recording?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, because I wasn't. Okay, so that's fine. I just panicked.
That would have been bad.
Oh, that would have been really bad. Well, I also got. Well, you know why I noticed? Because I got a message here that said your free meeting will end in 10 minutes because I'm the one who originated the meeting.
Oh, okay. You didn't sign in on my account.
I didn't sign in on your account. I signed in on mine. So just okay. So we have 10 minutes. We'll just go back to your Allen Hurns thought, but I apologize for that.
No problem.
Okay. So we'll.
So just go ahead with Allen Hurns?
Yep. Yeah, just go ahead with Allen Hurns.
Okay, I like Allen Hurns a lot with Dallas. With Dez Bryant gone, cut from the team, and Jason Witten retired, they have a ton of targets available. And Allen Hurns is a veteran, and he's shown he can lead a team in receiving. He was one of the bright spots for Jacksonville for a year or two, and then he kind of fizzled a little bit. But I think he's somebody that they could target. Another sleeper I like in Oakland, and I'm a Bucs fan. So this guy hurt, but Doug Martin, he was a pain the past year. But now that he's in Oakland, I love him as a backup to Marshawn Lynch, who's 32 years old. Martin's not yet 30, and that's one of those one of those dates you mark for running backs. So when they turn 30, that's a warning sign usually. But those two guys I like. Another guy we talk about post-hype sleepers. That's a Chargers wide receiver, Mike Williams, who was a big name last year coming into the draft, and he got hurt. And but I do like him as a late pick.
That's actually a great call. Like, sort of basically, you got excited about someone a year ago, then they didn't deliver, but they still might end up being good. So for me, the ultimate boomer bust player, and it's for obvious reasons, and it's Josh Gordon. Like Josh Gordon.
Oh, I'm all screwed up, man. I'm talking sleepers. I'm sorry.
Oh no, but it was kind of like all in the prompt, right? He said like sleepers, boomer bust. So
yeah, we can combine them. That's totally
fine. So for me, the ultimate sleeper and kind of the boomer bust and all this is Josh Gordon. Because if Josh Gordon is healthy and right and plays 16 games, the last time we saw that, it was a long time ago, so I don't know if he's still the same athlete, but he was the best fantasy receiver in the league that year in terms of on a per-game basis and what he produced with, I think it was Brandon Wheaton as his quarterback. Like, it's not like he was playing with incredible quarterbacks either. So if he's right and the Browns' quarterbacking situation is fine, or even if it's not, I think he could be one of the best fantasy receivers in the league. So, and then I think from a quarterback position, I think you actually mentioned him earlier, and it's a great call, it's Pat Mahomes. So I think a lot of people have him high because they have incredible targets because it's Andy Reid's system, but he might not be good. Like, we don't know if he's any good yet. So I think from a quarterbacking position, he could end up being, for me, like one of the 3 best fantasy quarterbacks, or he could just be a not good prospect who doesn't have a good year.
Yeah. Well, we're going back to Josh Gordon. That whole offense, suddenly the Browns are like this offensive juggernaut. There's talent at every spot. It's deep. So you look at Todd Haley as the offensive coordinator there now, and he's had a true number one receiver pretty much everywhere he's gone. Now, granted, it's been Antonio Brown, and it's been Larry Fitzgerald. So maybe Josh Gordon is that guy, but a lot of people are talking about possibly Jarvis Landry being that guy as the guy in the slot. And which
always great in those PPR formats. We learned that with the Dolphins.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Well, he wasn't used enough with the Dolphins, according to him. Actually, he needed to be thrown to on every play. And as we're taping this, actually, Des Bryant is still out there, and who knows if he ends up there. Before we shift to the Dolphins here, David, want to get to this. So give me you mentioned Doug Martin, but he's not really a sleeper because he was, a guy who was a 1,400-yard back. Give me one sleeper running back, somebody who's a little bit under the radar right now, but you think could be a guy who maybe goes from second string to first string at some point, or a rookie who's maybe a late round rookie who is maybe the Alvin Kamara of this particular fantasy draft.
Let's say super late round. That's a tough one. How about Devontae Booker with the Broncos? A lot of people are talking about Royce Freeman, the rookie, getting a lot of pub, but Devontae Booker, it's tough to say rookies as a sleeper because there's so many good ones that they're all going to be drafted after last season, which was the best rookie running back season in fantasy history with 4 in the top 15, I think it was, that they're going to be going fast and furious this year, which could be even a better crew this year. So if we would say maybe a little higher in ADP or a little lower in ADP, whichever way you say, Kerryon Johnson for the Lions, there's a guy that he's entering that backfield that has Theo Riddick, has the big guy LeGarrette Blount, and it has Amir Abdullah. Like, there's already a lot of guys that are touching that ball, but I think Kerryon Johnson is a guy that can do a little bit of everything. And as long as they don't, if LeGarrette Blount maybe is the short down guy and Theo Riddick is the passing guy, and if they could just give Kerryon Johnson all the second down carries, then maybe there's something there for him. But I like him as a guy eventually being a mid-round pickup that could be awesome, like Alvin Kamara was last year. Everybody waited. It was the 4th week of the season before he really brought some value.
Yeah, and Adrian Peterson actually had to be moved out of there for Kamara to get more action. All right, let's move on to the last part here of the podcast here with David Gonos. And again, you should follow him at Fantasy on 5 or at David Gonos on Twitter. Check out their podcast. It's available. They're going every Tuesday and Thursday during the season. They'll get you ready for waiver day and for lineup day every single week, him and Gary and Thorne. So check that out. But real quick here, we're going to do this quickly. Just give me sort of a round area for these Dolphins. Ryan Tannehill in let's say a 12-team league, your perfect league. Where does Ryan Tannehill go?
Tannehill's not getting drafted, unfortunately.
Wow.
He's going in week 6 or let's say week 8 when 6 teams are on buys. Tannehill's getting picked up. It's
the franchise quarterback. All right, let's move on.
It's not really a knock as much on him. It's just everything. I mean, there's so many quarterbacks out there, and right now it's 20 deep. That there's 20 different quarterbacks that could be starting in fantasy leagues at any in the first few weeks of the season. And once injuries happen and once bye weeks are here, Tannehill will have a lot more value.
All right, Kenyon Drake.
Right now, Drake has a 4th round ADP. I'd take him in the late 3rd. I love him. I think he's gonna have an excellent season. This is his first full training camp as the man, and that's a big difference. Like when you go into camp as the guy that now you're working on different things. You're not working on trying to take over somebody and learning the playbook and all that stuff. Now you can focus. You can do the things that they ask you to do specifically to become an even better player.
Unfortunately, that didn't quite work out for Jay Ajayi last year, but go on.
No.
Hey, maybe Drake gets traded to an awesome team.
And wins the Super Bowl. Very possible with Adam Gase. All right, Kenny Stills.
Kenny Stills, he's a 11th round. We're looking at double digits for that guy. I'm fine with him as like maybe a wide receiver 5, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5.
I love Kenny Stills.
You say that again?
I'm surprised by that because I figure like I would, well, maybe Amendola, but like I would tip Stills maybe to be the number 1 receiver in Miami.
And you know what? With Devontae Parker, like he hasn't getting the best publicity, it looks like, in camp so far. So it's not like Parker has really set himself apart. So you're right. That's a good value at 11th to get the number one receiver.
So is he but of the Dolphins receivers, who do you, in non PPR? So Amendola might succeed. Which of the Dolphin receivers goes first to you? Is it Parker's Stills or Amendola? Parker's going first.
Parker has the bigger the higher ceiling. Like that's how you think of it with these players. It's like the higher ceiling is Devontae Parker could be. I mean, this guy's body, like he just has it. He just has to figure it out. And go ahead.
All right, and last one here, Mike Gesicki.
Gesicki is there's depth at tight end, so he's not getting picked. Right now, he's kind of shooting up, though. He's a 14th round pick in ADP on Fantasy Football Calculator. He doesn't block, but he might not have to. But rookie tight ends, it's really rare for rookie tight ends to do well.
All right, so last one here. I know there's another Dolphin I did not mention, so get to that guy.
Yeah, one of my most popular last picks of the draft that's not a kicker or defense is Albert Wilson. I've been taking him in several leagues, and with the void left by the departure of Jarvis Landry, the targets that are available, Albert Wilson, he's only 25 years old. He came over from Kansas City. This guy's definitely could develop into a great asset for Tannehill's offense, and somebody's got to get those passes over the middle. I think it's going to be Wilson. I know Danny Amendola has the pedigree, but I think Albert Wilson would be the guy that eventually ends up being the better play there.
For me, the play that I'm actually kind of interested by is kind of, again, another bottom end of the draft guy. If you're going to be drafting particularly in a 12-team league, you're going to have to draft some backup running backs, and I don't think Frank Gore is that bad of an option. And particularly given the way they're talking about him in camp as someone who's going to be legitimately used and still looks, I don't know if like peak Frank Gore, but still a credible enough athlete to remain a usable running back. I feel like he's going to get some run with the Dolphins. So I feel like as a kind of bottom end of the draft, like if you just want someone to take a chance on that, maybe he gets some touchdowns and maybe he gets a bit more run than you might expect him to. Sure. I don't think Gore is a terrible option.
I would say in deeper leagues with larger rosters, I wouldn't mind taking him, even in the, say 13, 14, 15 round, but only because those late rounders, you really want to spend, we talked about ceilings a second ago. You want to spend on guys that have high ceilings that, like an Alvin Kamara. And you may end up cutting them in week 2, but you took a chance on something like that. Frank Gore, he would need an injury ahead of him to really, really provide a lot of value. So his ceiling's pretty low. His floor might be decent. If we're assuming he's going to get several touches, but at 35 years old, granted, we say every year, well, he's over 30, it's got to drop off, and he ends up being a top 20 running back almost every year. So at some point, the past 30-year-old thing's got to catch up to him. But maybe getting back in Miami is going to reinvigorate him, man. All
right, so final thing here for you, and just a yes or no answer on this. You're in a 12-team league. You have to draft one defense. Do you draft the Dolphins defense? Any of those 12 teams?
No.
And that's the way to end this. Check out the Fantasy on 5 podcast. Again, you can get it on our network every Tuesday and Thursday. Also, make sure when you subscribe, check out all the old episodes because Garion and David have done breakdowns of all the positions at this point, or the major positions, quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, running back. They get great guests on there, and they will get you ready every single week for your fantasy league. David, thanks.
I wanted to pitch real quick is we do a free fantasy draft tool segment every podcast, and it's a lot of fun. And we expose people to awesome free fantasy tools that are out there. And I just want to mention that because that's a really cool part of our podcast, I think.
Absolutely. Definitely do that. And I'm waiting for you to introduce the how to get the money back from deadbeats section of your podcast because I think we'll all learn from that. David, thanks for joining us. And again, you can catch Garion on an upcoming episode of 3 Yards Per Carry. We'll talk to you soon.
This is the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Sports by Miami for Miami on demand. We now have 10 podcasts in the network posting roughly 15 times per week. All can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and several cross-platform apps. We are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Here's some of what you missed last week on the Fish Tank when they interviewed Mike Pouncey.
Every single day when I came to work, I was the best football player I could be, and I felt like I made guys better around me, and I love the organization. I mean, We didn't win as much as we should have, but I love being a Miami Dolphin. I love the fact of saying, hey, listen, I'm a Dolphin.
If you want to get involved as a sponsor or a contributor, reach out to us at number 5 Reason Sports on Twitter. And don't forget to punch 5 reasons in your search bar and then hit subscribe.